We have returned with your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. He is Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. And as this is the most important betting stop, it is called the Money Stop, presented by Kickin the Tires and our new friends at GridRival. Cole, GridRival, really great up-and-coming motorsports betting app. Tell us a little bit more about what you know about GridRival, our new friends here with the program.
Yes, we're probably having them aboard here on the Money Stop and at Kickin the Tires. So GridRival is a motorsports-specific gambling site and app. They predominantly do head-to-head matchups and daily fantasy lineup constructions. And going through here, I mean, they have everything from F1, IndyCar, obviously to NASCAR. And what I've been told from our friends over there is that we've been kind of tasked with building up the NASCAR program over there. Today, we're going to go with our typical construction for this show and go with the daily fantasy DraftKings numbers. But going forward, we're going to go deep into the GridRival aspect of things. It's a little bit different from what you're used to with seeing on DraftKings and those types of gambling apps. So we just want to make sure that we're fully squared away before coming to you next week with all of the GridRival goodness as it pertains to daily fantasy and head-to-head matchups.
Well, Cole, how could we move on without talking about what was just an insane finish at Richmond? A lot to recap here with Austin Dillon wrecking his way to the checkers, taking out Joey Logano, Denny Hamlin, and anyone else in his path. We got to start with the elephant in the room. It's always a subjective situation. Anytime something like this happens, whether it be a bump and run or something this blatant and clear with the spotter telling him, do what you need to do, with Austin Dillon having the playoff eligibility stripped but holding on to the win, what is your opinion on the way that NASCAR handled this?
I think NASCAR did this perfectly. From the second this incident happened, I said that I think the bump and run on Logano was fully warranted. That's not anything that we don't see like on a yearly basis in the Cup Series or in any form of NASCAR racing. I think where the line was crossed was when he right-hooked Hamlin and sent him into the wall. And I think NASCAR was on point for stripping that playoff eligibility. Had it just been the bump and run on Logano, I don't think that would have been stripped away. He might not have won the race had he not right-hooked Denny Hamlin, but I think NASCAR has set the precedent once before, actually numerous times before. If you right-hook a driver intentionally, that is a big no-no. And I actually thought he got off kind of easy in not being suspended for one race because we saw in the past from both Chase Elliott and Bubba Wallace, who've done that in the past, they've been suspended for one race for that exact same reason. Chase Elliott, in regards to, with Denny Hamlin specifically in the Coke 600 in 2022. So I think NASCAR's reasoning behind that was because it was not retaliation. And for that, I kind of understand why they didn't throw the suspension his way. It's still like a win-and-you're-in deal or a supposed win-and-you're-in deal for the playoffs. So, I think we all understand why Austin Dillon did it. But when you have your spotter saying, wreck him, wreck him, wreck him, and you deliberately take out two cars for the win, I've said this a million times. I could do that and win a NASCAR race. Like, it doesn't take any talent to do that. With that said, Austin Dillon had an excellent car the entire race at Richmond. You saw that in practice and qualifying to start the weekend off. He carried that speed throughout the race. And, it was a bit of a bonehead move. But again, I understand why he did it. And I fully embrace NASCAR's penalties that were doled out to him and the 3 team. Spotter was also suspended 3 races for his actions over the radio. Before we move on, I just wanted to say on Richmond, this was probably one of the most compelling races that we saw there in the last maybe 10 years. And that's saying a lot because there were no cautions up until the final lap of the race when we spawned in overtime. But, they had the option tires, which I thought were a huge success. You saw Daniel Suarez and Michael McDowell kind of pioneer these efforts to start the second stage. And it was a major difference maker. You saw that these drivers that used the tires make up a ton of ground in the field. They drove to the lead pretty effortlessly against the drivers on the prime tires. And I think this is a really great stepping stone going forward for the future of short track racing in the Cup Series. And also, just one more thing with all this said, there was a lot of parity in this race, a lot of unpredictability, unknowns. At one point, we still had the top 7 drivers mentioned in our episode from last week, and we wound up having 6 of the top 10 drivers highlighted in the final running order. So we did a really good job, all things considered. And for what we called a kind of a feeler race coming back from that Olympic break, again, just thought we did a really good job.
As always, and I agree with you on several parts here. I think that what complicated that whole Austin Dillon situation was how blatant it was with the spotter directing him to do that. But it is disappointing because, like you said, I think people are getting lost in the fact that this was a great race for that 3 team, a great weekend for that 3 team that completely gets lost in the shuffle because of what happened. And he obviously could have won this race without doing that, had the caution not have come out. But, sometimes that's how the cookie crumbles. And I know there's a lot of people complaining about the fact that Joey Logano has moved some cars out of the way to win races in the past, but it hasn't been in that deliberate of a fashion. So it was a situation where I agree with NASCAR's decision. Every situation is different. That's why it's a subjective matter. And it's not a black and white thing. It's not like every time you move somebody out of the way, this is going to be the result. It's just the way that it happened. And as you said, Cole, I think that the option tires added a great wrinkle to this race. I feel like this is maybe the secret sauce that short track racing has been missing. And it kind of adds that IndyCar push to pass element of putting a little bit in the driver or team's hands as far as an extra layer of strategy on a week-to-week basis that I think is going to go an extremely long way. And I think it's a great development, and I'm excited to see how NASCAR handles it going forward. And you mentioned the fact that we had our top 7 drivers running late in this race in the top 7. Well, taking a look at the rest of the top 10, we forecasted this race after 3 weeks off really well, with Denny Hamlin still finishing second after being cleaned out. He was one of our favorites to win the race and my pick to win the race. Tyler Reddick was third, Bubba Wallace fourth, Ross Chastain fifth, Christopher Bell and Kyle Larson, a few more of our picks, finished 6th and 7th. Carson Hocevar, a top 10 and 8th, Chase Elliott 9th, one of our picks, and then Daniel Suarez with a strong run rounded out the top 10. But Cole, it is time to turn the page to this upcoming week of racing. We're going to Michigan, Cole. Starting lineup will be determined at 1:20 Eastern Time on Saturday. So taking a look at the pre-qualifying odds per BetMGM, you've got Denny Hamlin as the favorite, plus 550. Kyle Larson is plus 600. That is second. Co-favorites at third, Martin Truex Jr. and Ryan Blaney are plus 800. And right behind them, Christopher Bell at plus 850. So as we go to what has been the bread and butter for this next-gen package in the 2024 Cup Series, Cole, which is a 1.5 mile high-speed intermediate track, borderline super speedway like Michigan, I'm expecting a very compelling race this week. And as we look at our favorites category, got to start with 4 of those 5 drivers that we just mentioned.
Right, and I think this thing has to kick off with none other than Denny Hamlin, who is once again the odds-on favorite for a second straight week at plus 550, and is actually the second most expensive in DFS at $10,500, and for great reason. Denny Hamlin, he scored his second runner-up over his last 3 starts in the Cup Series with over 170 laps led in that span. Again, he is the laps leader in 2024 through 23 races, and he is also now only 21 points away from the points lead with these 3 races remaining in the regular season. So we saw it, how important this regular season title is, and I think Denny Hamlin is fully aware of that in search of his first ever title. And I think that we're going to see him keep up the pace he's had the entire season, but specifically the past few weeks. And looking at his stats at Michigan, there's no reason to believe why that will not continue into this 2-mile oval. He finished third in both next-gen starts. He is also the only driver with top 5s in both those next-gen Michigan starts. And he has a 4-race top 5 streak going there. Expanded further upon that, it's a 5-race top 10 streak with a 5th place average and laps led over his last 8 starts. So Denny Hamlin has been by far and away one of the most consistent drivers this season, but specifically at Michigan in recent memory, especially over his last 8 starts with those laps led. That is a huge deal when factoring in daily fantasy. But as we always say, Denny Hamlin is always an excellent pick for the win on a weekly basis, and this week's no exception. Now, for my other favorite this weekend, I'm going to go off the top 5 board and go down to Chase Elliott, who was actually plus 1,100 for the race win, and the 7th most expensive driver in daily fantasy at $9,300, which is about his median average for this season in daily fantasy aspects. So with that, I really like what I've seen from Chase Elliott this entire season. We've mentioned how he's been the most consistent driver the entire year. That ninth place finish at Richmond was his third straight top 10 finish, and it also brought his average finishing position to 10.4, which is still a series best. I don't think he's actually dipped below that number one spot in the average finishing position this entire season, so that speaks volumes to how great of a driver he's been all year. He's also back -6 in the standings, third now, and for someone who won the regular season title back in 2022, again, he is someone who is fully aware of just how important those bonus points are going into the round of 16. Now, looking at his recent stretch at Michigan, he finished 36th last year and 11th in 2022, so not the most dazzling stats in the next-gen era. However, he has finished top 10 in 10 of his 13 starts with a series-best 10.2 average among drivers with 10-plus starts. And again, although he does have those 10 top 10s and 13 starts, he is winless, and he opened up his career at Michigan in the Cup Series with back-to-back-to-back runner-up finishes, so 3 straight second-place finishes at Michigan to start his career there in the Cup Series. For all those reasons there, I love Chase Elliott, I love Denny Hamlin, and I think you have two other drivers here who are going to have as equally good of a shot at the win come Sunday.
Yeah, I will take two that are in the top 5 in odds, starting with Kyle Larson, who is plus 600 for the win. That's second highest. And then the most expensive daily fantasy driver at 10,700. He had a silently resilient day at Richmond, finished in the top 10. And what a lot of people forget is that they still have a lot to race for. And it's not like a situation for Kyle Larson where he can go for broke and just go for playoff bonus points. They want to win the regular season championship, and he's only 5 points to the good right now. So they're not just looking to sell out for a win. Obviously, that's what they're looking to do every week. But when it comes down to it, you're fighting for those guys like Chase Elliott, Denny Hamlin, and so on and so forth for the regular season championship. So I think that there's a lot to race for this 5 team. We've seen how good they've been at the intermediate tracks in this package. And looking at his work at Michigan last year, finished 7th and 5th in 2023, which continued a 4-race top 10 streak at Michigan. That includes 3 straight top 5s. He's also won back-to-back-to-back races at Michigan. That was back in 2016 into 17 when he was not in Hendrick equipment yet. So what I love about Kyle Larson is that there's a few tracks. It's like Michigan and Homestead that he excelled at before he was even with a Hendrick Chevy motor. And you thought of him when we went to these tracks. Now that he's in Chevy equipment, you think that he is going to be a force to be reckoned with every single time. And I think that this is a track that I put 2 and 2 together with Kyle Larson as thinking of it as one of, if not his best tracks on the circuit. Overall, a 10.9 average finish at Michigan, which is the second best among drivers with 10 or more starts. He's got 15. So he's been consistent here. He's been consistently elite here, and I just love what Kyle Larson's done this year and their position at this point in the season where Cliff Daniels knows what's at stake, and they are going to be a contender to win this race. Would not be shocked to see the 5-car in victory lane. And also, I mentioned it was kind of a quietly resilient day for Kyle Larson. Well, it was kind of a silent but deadly day for Ryan Blaney at Richmond. He was just outside the top 10 in 11th, and that was coming off the 3-week break. Prior to the break, he had 4 straight top 10s, including a win. So he was doing some of his best racing entering the break and now coming out of the break. Looking at his career at Michigan, he finished 9th here in 2023, which was his 3rd consecutive top 10. Started with a win on that streak in 2021, so he's had the great success here, and he's led laps in 6 of his last 7 starts at Michigan. He is the 3rd most expensive DFS driver at $10,300. A little bit of a steep price on that part. I would definitely prefer somebody like Chase Elliott for the reasons you named at his price, but plus 800 for the win, tied for 3rd in the odds per BetMGM. I really like a lot of Ryan Blaney and especially Kyle Larson this week, Cole, as those are our 4 favorites this week.
Yeah, you know what? I really do like Chase Elliott and Ryan Blaney as sort of like your, I guess, sleepers in a way in that favorites category. And I just want to say really quickly on Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin, I know we preached this before the 2-week break, how there was a little bit of volatility associated with those 2 heavyweights, in a sense that they kind of had the luxury of going all out for these wins. They can, play different strategies and really not worry about points racing. Well, you mentioned it in your analysis there, and I mentioned it in mine. We're coming down to 3 races to go until that regular season finale, and these guys are fully aware that that regular season title is a huge deal. I think you're going to see them start points racing now, and I think even with the volatility that we associate with Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin has had a little bit more so of that with a 14.6 average on the year, but I mentioned during my portion that he has been a lot more consistently good as of late. Kyle Larson, surprisingly, has a 12.8 average finish on the season, which is the third best among active drivers through those 23 starts. So I think, we did throw a little bit of caution to those two heavyweights before the break, but now you can start betting those guys with a lot more confidence if you were not before. I mean, they're still the 2 best drivers in the series by far, but I just think you could have a little bit more confidence putting a larger sum of money on the race winner props given the final stretch of the regular season.
Let's talk sleepers here, Colt. Moving on to our next round of drivers. I want to start with a couple of names that are trying to heat up entering the playoffs. I think these are 2 guys that 3 weeks out from the postseason, I look at as sleepers for the championship. If they get hot, they can win a championship. I fully believe that. But there's a lot of work to be done, especially with this first driver, because he is not even guaranteed a playoff spot, and that's Ross Chastain, who's plus 3,500 for the race win. I mean, look, we saw what he's done in the playoffs the last couple of years. 8,100 in daily fantasy seems like a really good value, and here's why. Coming off the top 5 at Richmond, if he can continue to string together some good results, we've seen what a hot Ross Chastain looks like. And again, he has more to race for than maybe anyone. 3 points back in the standings. He was kind of gifted on that consequence by NASCAR taking the win away from Austin Dillon, or at least the playoff eligibility, because that would have sunk him further back from the cutoff. But it's a blessing for Chastain to only be tied for 17th in the standings, 3 points out, and coming off a top 5. That is huge for that one team. And checking out his career stats at Michigan, he scored a career best 7th here in this race last year. Prior to that, his best start at Michigan was 24th. And in reference to calling Reddick a sleeper this week, last week he had very similar stats. Silver lining, 45 laps led between both of his next-gen starts at Michigan, which is tied for 3rd. I just like where that team's at, coming off a top 5. We've seen him be able to turn it on when they've needed to, and just that competitive spirit. Maybe to a lesser of a degree from Austin Dillon, but that when the going gets tough, Ross Chastain is going to do what needs to be done. And I look at the 3 races left with Michigan, and then you go to Daytona after next week. I think that it's a 3-race stretch for Ross Chastain that bodes really well. And looking at for Ross Chastain, his stats last week, we mentioned them at Richmond. That's why we called him a sleeper, finished in the top 5. Similar results in the past at Michigan. That's why he's a sleeper this week. And I really like the value for him as someone that could finish in the top 10, maybe sneak into the top 5. And at 8,100 in DFS, very solid pick as well. Another guy in that same vein I mentioned that is already playoff bound, and I think could definitely be a dark horse for the championship 4, that would be Tyler Reddick, plus 900, 9,600 in daily fantasy. That's the 6th best odds, or at least the 6th most expensive driver. Almost won again last week. He finished in 3rd, and there was a world where, if Austin Dillon didn't turn back left and right to get both Denny Hamlin and Joey Logano out of the running for the win, Tyler Reddick could have run right into it. So he finished 3rd, coming off a 6-race top 6 streak with 4 top 3 finishes in that span. So he is one of the hottest drivers in the sport. Talked about the presence of the regular season championship, Cole. He's only 5 points behind Kyle Larson in 2nd. A lot to race for. I think that can be a big momentum booster if he can potentially win a race and or the regular season championship entering the playoffs. He's got a 10.9 average finish and no finish better than 29th in the next-gen car at Michigan. Career best of 18th came in his first start at this track. Silver lining, he led laps here last year in 2023, and look at last week for Tyler Reddick. So it's been a little bit of a mixed bag of results at Michigan for Tyler Reddick. More bad than good, but I'm taking a lot of stock into the fact that this team is just racing really well right now. And again, 6 straight top 6s with 4 top 3s. I love what I've seen from the Tyler Reddick bunch this week, and I think that these are 2 teams, Reddick and Chastain, that are more than capable of doing what it takes to get hot entering the playoffs and make a statement. You're going to have those locks for the championship 4 when you look up and down the leaderboards like Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, and then the guys who are right outside of locks like Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney. And I think that next tier of drivers are the ones that should be considered dangerous entering the playoffs. And that starts with 3 weeks out of the playoffs. Tyler Reddick and Ross Chastain are two guys I've got my eye on this week.
Yeah, I like both those picks quite a bit. I mean, with those numbers stemming from Tyler Reddick, you literally cannot leave him off the episode and ignore him. And yeah, just like look at last week. He had, I think, one top 10 going into Richmond, and that was the prior race, and he went out and almost won the race again. So same thing can be said about Ross Chastain. I know he has kind of similar stats to what Reddick had at Richmond last week, so nothing to gloat about at all at at Michigan in his Cup career for Ross Chastain. But I think you look at that top 5, you look at how he took that top 5, he was over the moon about it, and as we know, Ross Chastain's a very temperamental driver. As you said, he's going to do whatever it takes to win, and I think they have the equipment and the driver to get it done this weekend at Michigan with another quality day. Now, for my sleepers, I'm going to start with the one guy that made the most waves following all the carnage in that finish last week, in Joey Logano at plus $1,600 for the race win and $8,800 for DFS, which is the 10th most expensive in daily fantasy. He went from potentially scoring his second win of the season to finishing 19th after that bump and run in turn 3. And I think the big thing to take away from this finish here was that you do not want to piss Joey Logano off, especially at this point in the season. I know he has not had the most competitive season to this point, but he's been turning it on as of late. He's getting those top 5s, getting those top 10s, getting wins, challenging for wins, and we see it time and time again. We saw it in 2022. This is a driver and a team that heats up when it counts. The playoffs are coming up here in 3 races, and like I just said, you do not want to piss Joey Logano off at this point in the season. And you look at where we're going right now, Michigan. He is a 3-time winner here. The last coming back in 2019. He finished 4th there in 2022 and 14th last year, so a pretty solid resume in the next-gen era with that 4th and 14th place finish. And that pretty much resembles his career at Michigan, which has been very consistent on the high end of things. He has a 67% top 10 rate, a 12.3 average, which is tied for the 4th best in the series, and 590 laps led, which is the best overall in the Cup Series with only 2 DNFs in 27 starts. So Joey Logano, he is red hot right now. He's been fast. He's one of the best drivers currently at Michigan. So I look for him to have a really, really strong day at that 2-mile track, potentially a race-winning day, but I'm looking for a top 5 from this team. And then one more driver that I'm going to bring up is my pick to win last week, and it might be weird to see him in the sleeper category because he's been in the top 5 in the race winner odds the entire season, but it makes more sense to have him in the sleeper category because he's still winless this season, and that's going to be Martin Truex Jr., who is plus 800 for the race win. That is tied for the 3rd shortest odds for the race win, and he is a steep $10,000 for DFS, which is the 4th most expensive overall. MTJ finished last place at Richmond, and it is officially time to see more. I think we could have said that maybe like a month ago, but I think now is time to put our foot down. Gotta stop overvaluing him and betting him with confidence because, I just mentioned it. He has not won a race this year. He started off as one of the more consistent drivers this year, but consistency does not pay in the betting world. And I think what we're seeing right now is a team and a driver that's kind of lost their way and trying to find their footing as we get into the playoffs. He has had a 25.8 average over his last 5 starts with 4 finishes worse than 24th. So that is a driver and a team that I'm not very confident in. This is more of a caution more than anything, especially after betting him with confidence last week. But I also wanted to say that his recency is too good to ignore at Michigan because he finished runner-up there last year at 42 laps led. He finished top 10 there in 2022, and he has a 7-race top 10 streak going there. And much like his 2024 season, he is still winless there. So I think MTJ, again, more of a caution than anything, but you can take some stock into that runner-up and laps led from last year and the top 10 in his other next-gen start. I would say I would not even touch MTJ for a race winner prop until we see what he does in practice and qualifying. But I do like Logano a lot. I like Chastain, I like Reddick, and I think this is a pretty solid sleepers category.
You know what? I'm going to fade MTJ at cost. At a top 4 driver in daily fantasy and the odds makers, I'm just not feeling it with those numbers. Like you said, I need to see more. And I'm somebody that when it comes to me betting on NASCAR specifically, I need to see the recency. And until I see it, I'm not going to feel bad about getting burned. I'm not going to feel bad if I fade MTJ and he wins this week because I just haven't seen what I've needed to see over the last 5 weeks. And listen, I just mentioned that kind of tiers of drivers entering the playoffs. Well, Truex is usually that guy that's tier 1 or 2. He should be a lock for the championship 4 with his experience and what he's accomplished in his career. But I don't see it that way. He's somewhere in that tier 3 where we need to see more. We know it's in there somewhere. We know that this is the make or break season for him to try and get that second championship. And listen, if it's not this week, then it's not happening, in my opinion. So I guess we'll see with Martin Truex Jr., but I'm with you that I like that sleepers tier a lot. It's a little bit of a volatile tier. I think that those 4 drivers are a little bit win or bust. Obviously, every situation of the 4 is different, but I really like where we're going with our first 2 tiers of drivers. Drifting over to value picks, though, Cole, let's go with a few deep dives here. We like to go deep dives on our favorite value picks of the week, which is mainly concerning daily fantasy. And I want to start with the deepest of dives in Corey LaJoie. He's been a top 20 finisher in both of his next-gen starts at Michigan, including 15th last year. He's had top 20s over 2 of his last 3 starts entering this one in 2024, including a 14th place finish at Indy. So I know this has been a brutal season for Corey LaJoie in a lot of different ways, but I also know that for the same reason that just knocked Truex, that's why I'm uplifting Corey LaJoie a little bit, because he's got the recency. He's been a top 20, top 15-ish car the last several weeks, and he has been that at Michigan over the past couple of years. So I'm going to take Corey LaJoie because he's valued at 5,300 in daily fantasy, which is a really good piece to round out your driver or your 6-man lineup for DraftKings and daily fantasy. So if you're looking for that 6th wheel, I think Corey LaJoie is definitely somebody that could make you some money this week and potentially make his way into the top 20 or potentially even top 15. And another that we've liked a lot this year in this category with the value picks, Cole, is Carson Hocevar. 6,900 in daily fantasy. He has always been a high floor, safe, and reliable bet. Finished 8th at Richmond, back-to-back top 15 finishes. He's also got 3 straight top 17 or better finishes entering this week. 2 top 10s, 4 top 15s, and 8 top 20s over his last 10 starts, where he's not finished lower than 24th. So what I'm looking at with Hocevar, high floor. He's another guy that if you can afford him as your 6th driver in your DFS lineup, I like Carson Hocevar a lot this week.
Yeah, those are 2 really great picks, especially the Carson Hocevar one. I think just seeing those numbers over his last 10 starts, it speaks volumes to what that team and that driver has been able to do as of late this season. And that's a really good sample size as well for this rookie. For me, I'm going to go with 2 flashier names, but one driver that has a really good value this week, and somebody that actually got signed to a multi-year extension to begin this week in Eric Jones at Legacy MC. Eric Jones is plus 12,500 for the race win and only $6,700 for DFS. He is actually only one of 5 drivers with top 10s in both next-gen starts. He finished 8th with laps led in 2022 and 9th last year, with the best finish of the 3rd in his second ever Cup start at Michigan. That was actually his only quality finish outside those 2 top 10s in the next gen. So I know it hasn't been maybe a great track historically for Eric Jones, but you look at how he's fared in the next gen, think that's a really good sign of things to come potentially for this weekend. You factor in the fact that there is the good fortune with the multi-year extension from Legacy MC. This is a home race for him. I think that this is definitely going to be a positive race for that 43 camp. Love that value at $6,700. Then finally, I'm going to go with our biggest name in this category, and it's going to be Daniel Suarez, who is plus 6,600 for the race win and $7,500 for DFS. Really, really good value. Suarez coming off that top 10 finish at Richmond, I thought was one of his best career showings. You know, they took that gamble early on in the second stage that kind of pioneered that option tire strategy. and it propelled them to a really, really solid top 10 day. They potentially could have won this race had that caution not come out. And yeah, I just thought that was a really big confidence booster for that 99 camp going into this weekend and, for the rest of the year to follow. But you look at his Michigan stats, he had a combined 45 laps between both Michigan starts in the next gen. He finished 6th there last year, and he scored stage points in 3 of 4 possible stages in the next gen. So with this current car, he has been one of the more consistent drivers at Michigan. And I think if you just factor into account what that team did last week, as well as what we've seen in the next gen at Michigan, it makes sense to that Daniel Suarez would be a really, really good value pick for this weekend.
Let's get this down to 6 drivers, Cole. We've got 4 favorites, 4 sleepers, 4 values. We'll each take one per tier. I am going to emphatically take Kyle Larson from the favorites category. I will take Tyler Reddick from the sleepers, and I'll go with Carson Hocevar for my value pick this week.
I'm going to go with a Richmond Raceway sweep of drivers. I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin for my favorite, Joey Logano for my sleeper, and then Daniel Suarez for my value pick.
Moving on along, Cole, let's talk big money bets. These are our favorite prop bets of the week. You can feel more comfortable throwing a big sum of money on. I think there's pretty good value this week with the top 3s, top 5s. This is one of those weeks where I would like to use big money bets as a little bit of insurance. Like if I think Tyler Reddick's going to win this race at plus 800, I'm going to sprinkle on plus 240 to finish in the top 3. I'm going to sprinkle on Reddick at plus 110 to be in the top 5. I would call that a big money bet. I don't think there's a ton of value in top 10s this week. I would say that you're looking at maybe like Daniel Suarez at plus 275 as a pretty solid top 10 bet value. But outside of that, I'm looking at really not a ton of value on that side of things. But top 5s wise, you've got Chase Elliott at plus 150. A few pretty solid options here for big money bets this week.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo some of what you just said. I do like the Daniel Suarez top 10 prop. I think just, again, coming off last week and looking at his stats in the next gen, that seems like a pretty solid one to bet on. I do like the Chase Elliott top 5 prop as well. I think you look at his stats from his career at Michigan, that seems like almost a no-brainer. And then I think the Logano one is not as much of a sure thing, but I think that's one that's worth looking at, factoring into account his history at Michigan and just what all transpired last week. I really, really have a gut feeling that the team's going to be fired up, and they're going to be racing with a chip on their shoulders and a lot of heat to close out the season. So give me Joey Logano and Chase Elliott top 5 props, and give me the Daniel Suarez top 10 prop.
Big fan of those, Cole. Let's talk some head-to-head driver matchups here. Match bets that are parlayable. I'll give you the 5 matchups, and I'll give you which driver is favored, and let me know what you think. So Bubba Wallace, heavily favored in a head-to-head matchup with Austin Dillon. You got Larson favored over Blaney. You have Alex Bowman favored slightly over Daniel Suarez. And then you've got 2 drivers that are almost even, Chase Elliott against Joey Logano. Martin Truex Jr. favored over Ross Chastain at plus 190.
All right, for these head-to-head matchups, I'm looking at 3 in mind right now. I definitely like Daniel Suarez over Alex Bowman. We spoke pretty in-depth on what Suarez did last week, what he's done at Michigan, and I think that will amount to a really solid day for that team, one that will put him ahead of Alex Bowman for sure this weekend. I think the Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney one's a bit interesting. I think both drivers have made their case for being 2 of the best in the series, or most consistent drivers in the series over this last recent stretch. But I think it's kind of a no-brainer to have Kyle Larson ahead of Ryan Blaney, just given his prowess on these style tracks and his overall stats at Michigan. And then, believe it or not, Austin Dillon's had pretty solid stats at Michigan throughout his career. I'm sure that win from last week will carry some momentum over. But until we see how that team does in practice and qualifying, I'm not going to be betting them with confidence at all. One thing I will say is that Bubba Wallace is another driver that's flown very under the radar, but he's also red hot this season. We had him in the top 10 once again. He finished top 4 last week. I believe that is 5 straight races of finishing inside the top 10. So that's a team and a driver that's, been tough to beat right now. And for that, I'm definitely picking him strongly over Austin Dillon. And you just look at what we've seen from Austin Dillon the entire season. He was 32nd in the standings going into Richmond. They have had a pretty abysmal season outside of Richmond. So it really is kind of a no-brainer to have him over Bubba Wallace. I think Vegas might be taking a little stock into account that maybe some new bettors this weekend will think more highly of Austin Dillon, but not in our case. So with that, parlaying Daniel Suarez, who is actually plus 100. He's actually not favored to finish ahead of Alex Bowman. Kyle Larson minus 130 and Bubba Wallace minus 300. You have a combined total of plus 395. And if you bet $20 on that, you're getting away with $99.08. So nearly $100 payout, $20 thrown on for Kyle Larson to finish ahead of Ryan Blaney, Bubba Wallace to finish ahead of Austin Dillon, and Daniel Suarez to finish ahead of Alex Bowman. And this is actually a parlay that I like a lot. I would even call it a big money bet.
There you have it, a big money bet out of the match bets this week. I think that is something that's definitely on my radar. And listen, Cole, we say it a lot. The longer we go in the season, the more races we have under our belt, the easier it is for us to predict some of these races. So as we look at a daily fantasy lineup, this was one of the more difficult weeks. I think that Vegas had the expensive drivers as the ones that probably should be a little bit higher priced. But taking a look through this lineup, Cole, we need that ace in the hole. And we decided this week to make it Denny Hamlin, $10,500 in DFS this week. He is our most expensive driver. And then on the back side of that, we went with Eric Jones at $6,700 as our cheapest driver. And working our way back from there, Daniel Suarez, one of our favorite values this week, was $7,500, second cheapest driver, I should say. And then right ahead of him, a few medium price drivers. Ross Chastain, $8,100, Bubba Wallace, $8,300. And then when you get to that point, it leaves you with another solid driver with a chance for the win, and that is Joey Logano at $8,800 in DFS this week. Rounding out our lineup, we had $100 left over. A few directions you could take this, Cole, but I think that we like the idea of maximizing the value with those drivers in the middle, like Ross Chastain, Bubba Wallace, Daniel Suarez. When we were trying to come up with a lineup, those were three pretty common names in a lot of the variations we attempted. Reiterating that you're going to want to look at the qualifying and practice times, but especially the qualifying based on potential for place differential points. But that is the lineup that you and I have collaborated on pre-qualifying.
Yeah, I feel pretty solid about this one. It was a bit of a difficult week to make a lineup. How I went about constructing this was I started with Daniel Suarez. Giving my analysis, I just kind of gravitated towards him. I like the fact that he's led laps in both his next-gen starts, and for a pretty considerable size in those two starts, 45 combined. Again, those stage points earned in 3 of 4 possible stages, I think speaks volumes to the consistency that he's had at Michigan. Then you look at, from there I went with Eric Jones, obviously, to kind of give you a bit more of a budget to work with, and he's only one of 5 drivers, again, to finish top 10 in both those Michigan starts in the next-gen car. Again, as your ace, Denny Hamlin, 2 runner-ups over his last 3 starts, with 170 laps led in that span. The only driver with top 5s in both Michigan next-gen starts and finishes of 3rd in both of them. So that's kind of a no-brainer, in my opinion, over Kyle Larson. And then from there, I just felt that Bubba Wallace was a really good call. I know we didn't specifically highlight him, but we did mention him in the head-to-head matchups. And to give you a more concise answer as to what his stretch has been, it's actually a 5-race top 15 stretch with the lowest finish of 13th in that span, and he's actually riding back-to-back top 5 finishes. So Bubba Wallace is red hot, 23-11 is red hot. I like him a lot for this weekend. And then finally, Joey Logano. I think he's also been a very consistent driver throughout his entire career at Michigan. He has the most laps led among all active drivers here currently. He's coming off a really, really tough result at Richmond where he probably should have got his second win of the season. He's a 3-time winner at Michigan, finished 4th there in the next gen in 2022, 14th last year. And he has the 4th best average finish in those 27 starts he's made at 12.3. So I think Joey Logano should be a really, really solid driver to kind of have him there as your middleman to bring you some more value with a quality finish that can range from top 10 to top 5 with a shot at the win.
Agreed. That really ties up our logic in that daily fantasy recommendation very well. But again, stay tuned. Social media at @_MoneyStop. We'll have all the developing storylines and things to watch, and also your social media, Cole, which will be found on the Money Stop. By not searching very much further, you'll have all the really important updates coming out of Friday and Saturday and into Sunday. And as we look at this 2:30 green flag Eastern time on Sunday, Cole, let's put our money where our mouth is. Take it to the bank. All the money-themed segments here on the Money Stop. And let's talk race winner picks. I was a few feet away from picking the winner back-to-back weeks. I successfully predicted Kyle Larson at Indy, at least back-to-back races. It was about 4 weeks apart. I picked Denny Hamlin last week. I had first pick. You had Seabell, another strong driver that I liked a lot last week as well. We both had good picks. Looking at this week, though, Cole, you've got the first pick at our race winners.
Ooh, wow. I thought I had Sleeper first, actually. So that's a very refreshing change of pace. I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin. I love what this driver has done as of late. I just mentioned it with the DFS construction, but 2 runner-up finishes over his last 3 starts. All those laps led. Got the wins, got the success at Michigan in his career and in the next-gen era. Give me Denny Hamlin from Michigan as my race winner.
Well, Cole, I'm glad you didn't take my pick because I feel very strongly about Kyle Larson this week. I don't like picking the same driver 2 of the last 3 weeks, but listen, you got to go with your gut. You got to put your money where your mouth is. I was right the last time about Larson, and I think he's going to win again. I just love Kyle Larson at Michigan. It's the track that I identify with him, and I think he's going to win this week. And my sleeper, Cole, as I have first pick, I will take Daniel Suarez. I'm looking at drivers right around that playoff bubble. Suarez is not on the bubble. Remember, he won that race at Atlanta early in the season, but you know that he wants to get some momentum entering the playoffs, and they are one of the teams that really can go for broke for a win this week because, again, they're not racing to stay within the cutoff line. They're not points racing. They are racing for a win, and all the great reasons that you mentioned on why Bubba Wallace is a good pick this week. I think he's a very solid sleeper for the win.
Awesome. Yeah, and Larson's a great pick, obviously, as he always is. But I think I'd be remiss if I did not mention, as we're recording today on August 16th, dirt racing legend Scott Bloomquist lost his life in a plane crash today. I think that Larson and the other dirt racers are going to be racing with a heavy heart this weekend. I think that, that'll play into a bit of a factor this weekend for him and the drive that he does. So I want to send my condolences out to the Bloomquist family. And he's also won 5 straight dirt races now, Kyle Larson, that is. So I think that's an excellent pick, as it always is. And for me, I'm going to go with Kyle Busch as my sleeper for this weekend. And it's weird to say as a sleeper, but he truly is this year, given his season. I know we didn't mention him. That's because kind of all of his stats are a little bit obsolete as we go into each race weekend. He's pretty much dominated every single track on the circuit, but we all know how his season's gone so far. But even with all that in mind, I think obviously we saw last week that RCR can bring competitive equipment to the track. Kyle Busch is one of the most successful drivers in the garage area, one of the most talented drivers in the garage area. So there's no reason why he can't surprise people and get that win this weekend as a legitimate sleeper at plus 3,500.
Well, Cole, we can't end this episode without doing something we like to do every once in a while, keep things fresh. You and I grew up huge NASCAR fans from 2008 on. That ignited our passion for the sport. That's why you work in the sport now. That's why we talk about it every week here on these airwaves. And we like to talk memories. And I don't have to ask you what your favorite Michigan memory is. I know what it is, but why don't you lead it off?
Yeah, this one's a bit of a twofold. So obviously my first memory is going to be Dale Jr.'s first points win with Hendrick Motorsports in 2008 at Michigan in that awesome Amp Energy Chevrolet. This was the first race I actually watched in its entirety. I know we both watched Phoenix once Dad got home from the race, and that was where our fandom really started. But this was the first race I kind of watched like through and through beyond Phoenix, and seeing Dale get that win really, really pumped me up and just sparked my obsession. Now going on whatever it's been like 15 years later. So that's got to be like up there for sure. But my number one memory is it's got to be the Batmobile car win in 2012. I remember that day so vividly. There was that long, like 150-plus race winless streak. He brought that awesome Dark Knight car to the track with the neon green 88 and just completely whipped the field and got the win, snapped that streak freaking 4 years later. And that was just a great day to be a Dale Jr. fan, and for me as a whole, it was just a surreal day, honestly.
Yeah, that was an incredible moment for any NASCAR fan to see that streak snapped in such a major way. For me, growing up a Jimmy Johnson fan, Michigan was always like a source of ire. Like Jimmy was so good here every year. He had such a strong car every year. Couldn't ever win the race. And I remember the most memorable Michigan moment for me was a negative one. Fuel mileage finish, as it always seemed to be at Michigan. It was going on probably 5-10 laps to go, and Greg Biffle ran out of gas. Jimmy took the lead. Final lap of the race. Looks like Jimmy's finally going to win at Michigan. He runs out of gas. Mark Martin wins the race. And that was a one that I vividly remember watching, and it was just classic Michigan at that point. Jimmy finally broke through in the 2010s, and it was well overdue. It was always one of his best tracks statistically. Just couldn't tie the knot until after he had already won 5 championships. But it's a great track. I love Michigan, and I think that this week, this year, this race, this package, all the storylines going in, I am particularly very excited for this race. It is the Firekeepers Casino 400, Cole. Final thoughts?
No, I think you summed it up really well just now there. I do really believe that with this current package and this car, what we've seen in 2024, this is shaping out to be a really, really intense and exciting race. I selfishly kind of want to see another fuel mileage finish because you mentioned it there with the Jimmy Johnson portion of your memories. I feel like those are kind of far and few in between in this day and age in NASCAR. And I think back in the day when they were coming more frequently, we were kind of bored of them and whatnot. But being a fan of the sport for so long now, I've grown pretty much accustomed to appreciating those finishes and the strategy that goes into them. So, I mean, I would like to see a fuel mileage finish. I think that kind of rewards a more deserving winner. But I think it's going to be a really hectic race. I think it's going to be very exciting, going to be action-packed. It's probably going to be the opposite of a fuel mileage race, but I'm really pumped up for it, and I think that's going to be, again, just a really, really fun one to watch.
It's funny the way things change over the years where, we used to think those were boring races, mainly because the way I used to see it was the driver that deserved to win wouldn't win those races, but I think now you see strategy such a big part of the sport, the team aspect such a huge part of the sport that those are some of the most entertaining races that we get. So see what happens. 2:30 Eastern time. It is at Michigan International Speedway, Cole. Exciting stuff. We're going to drop the jack on the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, the money stop. He's Cole. I'm Steven. We're the Cusumano brothers. And we will see you next week as the race for the playoffs rolls on here on the money stop.
Gotta make 'em wanna come back for more.